4 hours. That's roughly how long it took Harry Markopolos to conclude that Madoff's numbers couldn't possibly be real. Not 4 years of investigation, not a subpoena, not a raid, not an informant. 4 hours at a desk in Boston with a calculator and publicly available numbers. That was in February of 2000. Madoff was arrested in December of 2008, which means the arithmetic sat there, finished and correct, for almost 9 years while the money kept coming in. And the reason it sat there is the part of this story that almost nobody tells properly. By December 2008, America was already exhausted. Lehman had gone under in September. People at work were being walked out with boxes, and the news had this permanent grinding quality to it. And then this came across, and it was somehow worse. Not bigger, worse. Because the other collapses were about systems and leverage and mortgage products that nobody could quite explain. This one was just a man lying to people who trusted him, some of them for 30 years. His name was Harry Markopolos. In 1999, he was a portfolio manager at a firm called Rampart Investment Management in Boston. A colleague of his named Frank Casey came across Madoff's numbers, and Markopolos' bosses gave him what sounded like a routine assignment. Reverse engineer this guy's strategy so we can offer something like it. He couldn't. And by the end of that year, he understood that the reason he couldn't was that there was nothing there to reverse engineer. Here's what he saw, and I want to go through it because it's not complicated. That's the whole point. It was never complicated. Madoff reported 3 down months across 87 months of trading. Over that same stretch, the S&P 500 had 26. Now, a good manager beats the market. A great manager beats it consistently. Nobody, in any market, using any strategy involving actual securities, produces a line that's smooth. Markets go down. They go down on days when nobody expected it. A strategy that never has a bad quarter is not a strategy. It's a claim. Then there was the second thing, and this one isn't a judgment call at all. Madoff said he was running an options strategy. Markopolos looked at the volume that strategy would have required and compared it to the total reported volume in that options market. The volume his supposed strategy would have required was so large that the numbers didn't make sense against the actual size of the options market. That wasn't a matter of opinion. The numbers simply didn't add up. It's the same kind of problem as saying you drove 900 miles in an hour. No amount of skill makes an impossible number possible. By the end of this video, you'll understand why 5 separate warnings over 8 years to the agency whose entire job is exactly this, produced nothing at all. In May of 2000, Markopolos walked an 8-page document into the Boston office of the Securities and Exchange Commission and handed it to the Director of Enforcement. Nothing happened. In October of 2001, he went back. Same analysis, plus 3 more pages, plus a 2-page explanation of the investment process. Nothing happened. There's a detail from that period I keep coming back to. Around 2000, someone at Fidelity was preparing to study Madoff's strategy. The same instinct Markopolos' own firm had. Figure out how he does it. That person met with Markopolos, heard what he'd found, and dropped the project. So it wasn't that the argument was unpersuasive. When a professional heard it directly, it worked. It just never reached anybody. Who could do anything? Then November 2005. This is the famous one. 21 pages. The title was not subtle. The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud. 29 separate red flags laid out in order. That Madoff cleared his own trades, with no independent party holding the securities. That the auditor signing off on billions of dollars was a small storefront operation in Rockland County, essentially one man. That there was no outside custodian anyone could call to confirm the assets existed. The impossible options volume. The impossible smoothness. Any single one of those things is enough to make a professional pause. Together, on one document, they are not a suspicion. They're a map. The SEC opened a file, made some calls, closed it. He went back in June of 2007. He went back in April of 2008. 5 submissions. 5. Now, I want to be honest about why nobody moved, because the regulators were lazy is too easy, and it isn't really true. Bernie Madoff had been chairman of NASDAQ. He sat on industry committees. He was, in the mental filing system of everybody at that agency, one of the people you consulted about fraud, not one of the people you investigated for it. The complaint didn't fit the shape of the thing they were looking for, so it kept getting read as something else. A competitor's sour grapes, a technical dispute, a guy with a grudge. Markopolos also described a turf problem between the Boston office he was talking to and the New York office that would have had to act. He said the agency was full of lawyers and short on people who actually understood how the market worked day to day. And underneath all of it may have been something simpler. Nobody wanted it to be true, because if it was true, it was enormous, and somebody was going to have to explain how it had gone on for that long. Markopolos was also genuinely afraid. He believed that someone capable of stealing billions of dollars might also be capable of trying to silence the person exposing him. That fear stayed with him for years. It ended in December 2008, not because anyone caught Madoff. The market fell, redemptions came in faster than new money, and he ran out of cash. He confessed to his own sons, and his sons turned him in. 11 federal felonies, 150 years. In February 2009, Markopolos testified in front of Congress, and the line everybody quotes is the one where he says he gift-wrapped and delivered the largest Ponzi scheme in history to the SEC, and they couldn't be bothered to investigate it properly because they were busy with higher priorities. But that's not the line that stays with me. At an event around the same time, he said, "I stand before you a $50 billion failure." He had been right about the numbers, but being right after the damage is done is very different from being right in time. Now, here's the part I owe you, because this is where the story usually gets flattened into a hero movie. Markopolos had a motive. He said so himself, on television, when asked directly. Madoff was a competitor. Markopolos' firm was losing business to a man he believed was cheating, and he wanted him off the field. That doesn't make him wrong. His math was correct in 2000, and it was correct every year after. But he wasn't a disinterested citizen who stumbled onto something. He was a competitor with a grievance who also happened to be right, and he never pretended otherwise. I'd argue that makes the story more useful, not less. Because the person who notices the fraud is usually the person with a reason to look. And there's one more thing that almost nobody knows, and it genuinely changed how I think about this. That $65 billion number everyone remembers wasn't $65 billion of real investor cash. It was the value shown on Madoff's fraudulent account statements, including years of fictitious gains. The actual amount of investor principal was far lower, roughly $20 billion, depending on how the losses are calculated. And here's the surprising part. The recovery effort eventually returned nearly all of the eligible fraud losses. By the end of 2024, the Justice Department's Madoff Victim Fund had distributed more than $4.3 billion to more than 40,000 victims in 127 countries, covering about 93.7% of eligible fraud losses. 94% is remarkable. It is also not the same as whole, because you can return somebody's principal and you cannot return 16 years. The average individual loss was around $250,000. These were not, for the most part, the celebrities you read about. They were ordinary people, small investors, retirees, charities, pension plans holding money for people who worked paycheck to paycheck. But recovering the money years later couldn't give victims back the years they spent wondering whether their savings would ever return. A financial recovery can replace dollars. It can't replace time. And the $45 billion in profits that never existed, the retirement those statements described, that never comes back, because it was never there. So what do you actually do with a story like this? I'm not going to hand you a checklist for spotting the next Madoff, because if it were that easy, the SEC would have managed it. But there are 3 things in this story that are just structurally true, and you can check all of them without any expertise at all. The first is custody. Start with custody. Ask who actually holds the assets, and whether someone independent from the person managing the money is responsible for safeguarding and reporting them. You want to know who, besides your investment manager, can independently confirm that the assets exist. Madoff's entire fraud exploited that lack of independent verification. Most legitimate arrangements have a separate custodian, and you're entitled to know who yours is. Most legitimate arrangements have a separate custodian, and you're entitled to know who yours is. The second is consistency. Real investment returns are usually uneven, especially when the strategy is exposed to market risk. Consistently smooth returns don't automatically mean fraud, but they should make you ask how those returns are being generated and independently verified. The third is verification. For investment advisors who are required to register, you can check their registration and public disciplinary information through databases such as the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure System. It takes only a few minutes. None of that is advice about what to buy. It's just the difference between trusting a statement and confirming one. Here's where I land. It was handed to the right agency 5 separate times. And it sat there. Not hidden, not classified, not lost. Filed. In a drawer. In a building in Boston. While a man in New York kept taking money from school teachers and widows and small foundations for another 8 years. The warning existed the entire time. It just never got read by anyone who was willing to believe it. That's the thing I keep running into on this channel, over and over, in one form or another. The information is almost never missing. What's missing is somebody willing to act on it while it's still early enough to matter. If this was useful, subscribe. I'll keep going through the warnings that got filed away and what they mean for the rest of us. And if you've never checked who actually holds your money, go look. Not because I think anything's wrong, because it takes 2 minutes, and the whole point of this story is that the 2 minutes were always available. I'm glad you're here. See you next time.